on a long Sable Isle, not so far away, where the dunes meet the sky and short are the day.
Welcome to East Coast DNA. Today's guest, Mike McKenna Jr., is a Cape Breton boy, but you actually spent quite a bit of time away as well. And this is kind of a rebirth in our region. So thank you, Mike, for reaching out. I'm happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I might be considered to come from away these days by some people, but I try to keep my connection to Cape Breton strong.
So I do want to get into maybe some of your early history, but I am curious. You've been back for a little while now.
Yeah, I came back to Cape Breton after or during the COVID-19 pandemic. And
Yeah.
that's where I wrote the majority of this album, actually. And so it reflected that time. I had spent 10 years in Montreal. Um, yeah, I was born and raised in Cape Breton. And I mean, I lived here till I was 18. And after university, I would go travel around the world as much as I could. And I ended up landing in Montreal. It's a great artist city, and it kind of kept me there. And I made all four of my albums there. And
Hmm.
so when I came back here, I had developed a great musical group in Montreal. And so during the pandemic, we were all cut off from a lot of our friendships and from face-to-face working relationships and stuff like that. So coming back to Cape Breton really cut me off from everything, and just I
Hmm.
kind of went into my own creative space at that time.
And so I'm thinking that when you're a musician in Montreal, especially for your genre being kind of, I know the terminology these days is Americana, but I think the last few episodes we've actually been kind of bantering around new labels. So, I mean, you could feel free to call it what you will, but
Sure. I mean, Canadiana is a label that gets thrown around in Canada
yeah,
too. If you're singing about Canadian subjects,
sure.
like Gordon Lightfoot, or Willie Dunn, or I think the Tragically Hip were absolutely a Canadiana band,
Yes.
and we're known maybe for talking about Canadian towns and Canadian people that maybe a lot of the bands that we listened to didn't, and so it sounded a little
Hmm.
different to us. And some of us, when I was growing up, I mean, we looked to America for music quite a bit.
Yes.
But it was always nice to have a Canadian band or especially in the Maritimes here, we have a lot of Maritime specific groups that talk about lots of our towns, and it makes us feel pride. And so I like the term Canadiana. I think I
Mhm.
use that quite often to describe my own music.
Do you find that bringing that into the Montreal music scene, like with your own background, that it people were looking to you for a Cape Breton sound? I mean, Cape Breton's known all over the world for a sound.
Yeah, of course. And we're known for maybe a combination of things. I think predominantly for our Celtic music,
Hmm.
that's obvious, especially Western Cape Breton, Mabu and Marguerite and these places, like very, lots of great fiddlers come from there. And fiddle was my first instrument as a kid. But eventually I got into guitar and I started writing songs, and I'm from Eastern Cape Breton, industrial Cape Breton.
Hmm.
And we have our own vibe on that part of the island. Um, and I wanted to tell the stories of specifically my side of the island, maybe not the typical Celtic identity of Cape Breton. I thought maybe like a folk singer-songwriter type of perspective in my songs might be a way to describe the stories of Cape Breton in a way that we often heard in maybe American music.
And now with the little bit of a variance from what you typically do get from artists in our region,
Yeah,
is your time from Montreal actually part of that influence with your sound today?
sure. Yeah, I mean, like going back to your last question, when I first started playing in Montreal, I think the chat in between songs is such an East Coast thing that
Hmm.
uh, I grew up seeing singer-songwriters around Cape Breton, and they'd make people laugh, and it was like, there's a whole show in between the music, right? And it comes naturally to people around here. And I guess when you start playing in Quebec and Ontario, and the further west you go, maybe the less you see this in this country. And it's not that there's not great storytellers. It's that we happen to have a knack for it on the East Coast, and it becomes something that we kind of think that every show is like that. And so I
Hmm.
would play shows in Montreal, and people be like, "I really like that East Coast thing that you do, and the chat and the stories and stuff." And I'm just thinking, yeah, I grew up with that. That's the way we do things when we play a show. It's the chat is a big part of it. And so I definitely brought that part to my live show in Montreal. And then after being there for 10 years, it did have a lot of influences on me. I mean, great musicians, Leonard Cohen and the Wainwrights, and there's a great jazz scene with Oscar Peterson and the Schulich School of Music at McGill, like Montreal Jazz Fest. It is a great musical city in its own right. Um, and just being around a lot of artists, it's also a big city compared to even Halifax here in the Maritimes. There was just so many artists in Montreal of all kinds that it can become really inspiring. And I lived in the plateau where a lot of the artists live and a lot of the venues are, and played a lot of small venues there. And kind of, that's where I got my start. I would sometimes do live jams where you just kind of sing up there with whatever, and there was a band kind of jamming behind you. And I did a couple ciphers actually that some of my friends invited me too. And Montreal kind of became my creative playground for the first few years of getting over stage fright. And that was a thing for me too. So
Hmm.
Montreal was a kind of a place where maybe I was a little more anonymous than if I was starting out here in the Maritimes. And every time I played out at a bar, I know everybody. Oh, there's someone I went to high school with, and there's my old music teacher, and oh my, and Montreal was a little more. Um, I mean, it's not that they're not accepting about music around here. They very much are, and they're always interested when someone's playing at a bar compared to a lot of other places around here. People are really listening and paying attention. But I mean, Montreal's just a very artistic place. There's a lot of
Yeah.
musicians. There's a lot of creative people, and there's a lot of great stages in Montreal for that. For music, for comedy, for everything.
And so now that you are back in our region, I'm aware that when you did first come back, you took the time to reflect and put out an album that you had quite a bit of success with on its own. But I'm curious, in the time since the past, well, 3 to 4 years, because the album's all just around the corner. So, I mean, you already recorded it. So, in that time frame, did you find that you've kind of integrated back into the music scene a little bit around here so that your influences going into producing this new album are a little bit different than your writing approach or maybe some of the narrative that you
I
put
think that
along?
actually might be the biggest difference between this album and my previous albums, because you know, although I was coming back, and even over the 10 years I lived in Montreal, I was coming back to Cape Breton all the time and playing, after maybe my first few years of playing only in Montreal, the first place I started coming back to play was here. You know,
Hmm.
I played Governors here in Sydney and Cape Breton. I played a place called the Company House. It was actually a Cape
Hmm.
Breton themed, bar in Halifax, and they used to put on great shows. And it's closed now, but even in that time, I was always coming back. So I did a bit of writing here, but I probably did the majority of my writing in Montreal. So this record, yeah, I came back, had a lot of time here to myself. My dad and I fixed up a camper van and kind of turned it into a little cabin kind of writing space where we put hardwood floors and cedar on the walls and stuff.
Cool.
And so I was writing in there all the time, and it was a completely different atmosphere than writing in my apartment in Montreal.
Hmm.
Um, I guess I got to be fully immersed in, you know, what was influencing me this whole time in my imagination. And I got to come home and just be in Cape Breton the whole time. I took that van up to the Highlands, did some hiking, did some camping, spent a lot of time out in the woods because everything was closed. So it was definitely a good time to reconnect with home. And I don't think I've ever lost that connection. I think I've always come back here to make sure that I have a good, healthy dose of Cape Breton, at least once or twice a year. It's
Hmm.
beautiful here in the summertime, and there's, some really nice festivals here. I just played a place called the Acoustic Roots Festival in my home community of Mira. So there's a lot of good grassroots festivals here in the last couple of years. Yeah, I've been reconnecting with the scene here, and playing a lot more. There's a lot more in the rounds, like songwriter circles around here
Hmm.
over the past 5, 6 years. That's really taken off. So I love that. I love that format. I'm playing one tonight in Lewisburg at the Fortress of Lewisburg. And the Fortress was a place that it's a National Historic Site. And I worked there as a drummer, as a musician when I was a
Oh,
teenager.
cool.
So
That's
this is
fun.
kind of a full circle moment. I'm going back. Yeah, they've set up a full venue in the old restaurant. It's beautiful stone and wooden floors. And yeah, that's going to be a really cool show. So there's a lot of there's a lot of great shows happening in Cape Breton right now. I think there's some people that are really injecting a lot of energy into the Cape Breton music scene when it comes to events that I've seen the last 3 or 4 years really start to pick up.
Yeah, I think the same time frame that you're talking about is pretty much my time frame of podcasting and covering the music scene, because it was kind of that rebirth of the scene that my brother and I originally were covering. But
Yeah,
now it's full tilt. Like there's always something happening somewhere, like pretty
yeah,
much
yeah.
almost every night of the week at this point.
Might have been a built up energy of from 2020
Hmm.
that just kind of exploded in 2021, 2022, 2023.
Yeah.
We just had all these ideas build up over that year. We realized what was valuable to us.
Yes,
I
exactly.
think a lot of people started outputting creative energy that maybe was built up in whatever they were doing before 2020. Maybe some stuff that they wanted to do. Now everyone had all this time on their hands. I mean, I made an
Yeah.
album, but lots of people started podcasts or built something or started a new skill. It was a very good time for that. And I think we're seeing kind of a rejuvenation period now
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
all
No,
that's coming to fruition. It's all coming out. And.
it's nice to see that we now that things are stabilizing, that the opportunities that were afforded, like they're still they didn't go away. I mean, we got to
No, no,
balance our
definitely
schedules
not.
a little differently, but yeah, the opportunities are there, and we have things like this, as we were talking just before we started recording. It's a little bit out of the wheelhouse for some of us, but at the same time, it's super
I think you had to
convenient
get
too.
pretty used
So
to these types of podcast formats.
yeah, yeah.
During the pandemic. There was a band from North Carolina that I met on tour a few years ago that started one. They started a video podcast,
Hmm.
and now it's turned into a live show. It's
Yeah,
my friend Sam Taylor. He's in a band from Charlotte called Time Sawyer. And I had played a So Far Sounds show with him in Raleigh in 2017. We stayed in touch, and then he invited me during the pandemic to be on his video podcast.
yeah.
And so I would record something and send it to them, and it was something fun to do for me. And his followers really enjoyed the show. And then he turned it into a live show at a venue in Charlotte called the Evening News. And so he completely converted this. They called it Sam on Sundays because his name's Sam Taylor. So he started a Sunday show once things opened up, and he brought all the musicians out from Charlotte to kind of jump on stage and jam together. And it's become. I just played it actually last week. It's still going 2 years
Oh, I
later.
love
So
it.
so even a lot of these podcasts have turned into live events, or they've turned
Hmm.
into other things too. So I think it was a good way for people to keep the conversation going. And I've seen it lead to some really cool stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So now you have this new album, Smokey Mountain High. Um, Speaking of kind of roots and the influence of Cape Breton, one thing I did notice is that in with your track listing, aside from all these original tunes, you have a traditional song worked in there as well. So where did the concept come from to put that in there? How did you feel that it fit with the flow of your new material?
Well, I think I always try to pick something old and make it new.
Hmm.
I always try to find something. In my first album, I didn't have a traditional song, but then in my second record, Pacific Northwest Bound, I found an old Nova Scotia folk song called The Chesapeake and the Shannon. It was in the Helen Creighton collection. Uh, she she had a few different versions of this, but the one that I found was an old story about a Nova Scotia ship going down to Boston to capture an American ship in the War of 1812. I found it really interesting. I did a cover of it on that album, and ever since then, I really wanted to maybe have some kind of either cover or traditional on each record. And my last one, Edge of the World, I did "Working Man" by Rita McNeil, and I just kind of found one that fit into the rest of the songwriting after the fact. But this song, when I first came to Caledonia, that was when I came back to Cape Breton, and I was, things weren't open yet. I was staying with my parents, and I was hanging out on the front porch, and I was just kind of digging through old Cape Breton music and old Cape Breton magazines, and this song really jumped out to me because it had a lot of references in it that really hit home with me. It was
Hmm.
Caledonia, I mean, is another word for Scotland. And so there's been many Scottish artists that have seen this song and thought, oh, there is a famous song called Caledonia, but they would see this song and say, when I first came to Caledonia, it must be about Scotland. And when they would dig deeper, they'd find out it's from this tiny little community in Cape Breton in Glace Bay called Caledonia Mines. And this is where my grandfather was from, my mom's father. And I mean, even the character in the song, he says, me and my brother Charlie, my grandfather's name was Charles.
Amazing.
And his mother was from Scotland. So his father was a coal miner and my grandfather worked in the mines as a shaft operator. And so this story was very, very relevant to me. It was about them getting
Mhm.
indebted to the company store. A lot of miners would get indebted to these mining company stores that would
Mhm.
give them credit, but they were paying them so little or giving them so, not enough hours to get by that they would always kind of end up owing money to them at the end. And these brothers in the story, that's exactly what happens to them. And they end up getting relegated to a little island. It's a lighthouse island, really close to here. I'm actually in Mira in Cape Breton along the Mira River right now.
Oh wow. Okay.
And where the Mira River goes out to the ocean, to the Atlantic Ocean, you have Mira Gut is where it meets the ocean, and Mira Bay is the area right outside that. And in Mira Bay is a large island called Scattery, and it's a lighthouse island. And it's abandoned now, but I actually I know people personally whose families used to be lighthouse operators in lighthouse island families. Okay. And it was actually way back in the day. If you were from this area, Manitou, Catalone, Bateston, all of these areas around that, and you were having a baby, they would take your wife out on a boat, and the midwives were actually out on
Oh
Scattery Island, and your baby would get delivered out there, and then they'd bring you back. It was a really interesting place, right? And so now it's abandoned. There's still a lighthouse out there, but some of the buildings are kind of falling apart. Um, it's really beautiful. Kind of think of the movie The Lighthouse, like with Willem
yeah, yeah.
Dafoe and Robert Pattinson. That's the kind of feeling when you go out there. And so these brothers in the story, after they get indebted to the company store, get sent off to Scattery Island to fish and see if they can make some money on fishing and come back and pay their bill with this guy Donald Norman, who was a real guy in Glace Bay and really ran a company store.
Wow.
And there's pictures of him if you Google him, the real Donald Norman, and he's in this song. And my grandfather's family actually ran a store as well. They ran their own store in Caledonia, and it was really to not be a company store. It was really they were just a general store that kind of kept their doors open during the world wars
Mhm.
and stuff like that, and really gave so much credit out to people who couldn't feed themselves that they would actually go under as a store. So this song, in many ways, was really connected to my own family history between my grandfather and his mining heritage, and coming from Caledonia to even Scattery is really close to where I grew up here in Mira. So yeah, that song really jumped out to me. I started messing around with it on the porch of my guitar and found my own version of it. The other versions I'd found were from Scottish singer-songwriters Tony Cuff and Norma Watterson, and they had a very Celtic angle to the song.
Mhm.
And I love Celtic music and was raised on it. And really, if I didn't hear their versions, I might have taken exactly that approach with it. But
Sure.
when I heard theirs, I think I want to take this into a slightly more North American sound.
Mhm.
Maybe a Nova Scotia country folk kind of sound. More of a Canadiana vibe because it is like these are two artists from Scotland, and I'm from Cape Breton. This song is
Mhm.
from my part of Cape Breton as well. So I'm going to do it in my style. You know?
Yeah,
And so I tried to make it my own.
those parallels are amazing. Like to be able to find something that
Shocking.
fits like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was really as soon as I heard this song, I was like, I have to do a version of this myself.
And along the lines of that kind of country folk reference there too, I know that on the album there's a lot of different instrumentation in there as well. There's some of the songs are quite layered, and a couple of the songs are actually co-writes. So maybe if you want to talk a little bit about some of the people that you collaborated with to make the full
Sure.
album.
First and foremost, a lot of the instruments that you're hearing are my producer, Quinn Bashand. He's a good friend of mine. He produced my last album, At the Edge of the World, an absolutely integral and part of my sound the last couple of records. And I really value working in the studio with him. He is an incredible fiddle player and guitar player. He played drums and bass on this album. So yeah, I can definitely say At the Edge of the World, my last record, and this one, Smokey Mountain High. Definitely reflect my working relationship with Quinn. He's from Victoria, BC, and I mean, he understands Cape Breton music for sure. He toured with Ashley McIsaac for a really long time,
Cool.
playing guitar, sometimes fiddle, but playing guitar as a side musician. So he knows the Cape Breton sound. He can play Cape Breton style fiddle very well himself. So we were able to kind of turn that on and off as we wanted to, depending on the song and how it fit in, and he can play many different styles. So yeah, that's his fiddle playing on Long Sable Isle and on when I first came to Caledonia. Um, but also I think I wanted to have maybe a fiddler that wasn't from Cape Breton as well. So I could, if a song like when I first came to Caledonia, I didn't want necessarily that pure Cape Breton style or Celtic style. I wanted to go in a slightly more Americana or country folk kind of sound.
Hmm.
Quinn's pretty capable of replicating that. So hats off to him. He was a really big part of this record. The two co-writes were with another Nova Scotia artist that I've done a previous co-write with for my last album. We wrote a song called Caught in the Middle from my album At the Edge of the World.
Hmm.
And her name's Makayla Lynn. She's originally from the Halifax area. And she moved down to Nashville when she was pretty young, when she was 12. Her mom's her manager. They fully committed to moving down to Nashville, and she's pursued a career down there and done really well for herself. She writes with all kinds of big artists. She's a fantastic songwriter. And after we wrote Caught in the Middle, I knew that I wanted to write a couple more songs with her. And during the pandemic, when I was doing all these little sessions in my cabin van, I would call a few people up and do a few Zoom call
Hmm.
writes, or FaceTime writes. Um, and her and I would write a song called Grassfire, the first track on the album, and we'd write a song towards the end of the album called A Hill to Die On. So we would write two more together, and I'm really excited about both of these songs. Grassfire is more of a single, it's more of an upbeat. It's the first song on the record. Hill to Die On's towards the end, and it's a little deeper and it's a little more societal commentary. And I'm really excited about that song too.
Now, you mentioned kind of the societal commentary, and we just talked about all the kind of influences that would pull the traditional song in there because there were many parallels. I was really surprised to hear how many. But overall, for the album, did you have a general concept? Like, would you call this a concept album? Because I noticed you also embedded some interludes in there. Is usually for me, if I see interludes, that's an indication that somebody's put a lot of thought into the whole flow of how the songs go together.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would call it a concept album. I mean, the title, for example, Smoky Mountain High, was influenced by one of my big influences in this type of sound, John Denver, country road. Thank God I'm a country boy. A guy that was really a folk artist, but was playing country music and just wasn't accepted by the country world. They rejected him, because he was progressive and because he just didn't fit the image that they thought was country music. And so he wrote great songs like Rocky Mountain High, um, about Colorado and about the mountains out there. And I took the idea of Rocky Mountain High and kind of explored that as well. And Smoky Mountain High is really about our mountains. It's about Smoky Mountain up in Ingonish. It's not the Great Smoky Mountains of Appalachia,
Hmm.
which most people probably think when they think Smoky Mountain. They probably think of the Blue Ridge Mountains or the Great Smoky Mountains down in Tennessee or North Carolina. But we have a Smoky Mountain in Cape Breton, and it's right as you're coming into Ingonish. It's got a great ski hill and a gondola and a beautiful view up top. And Cape Smoky, as we call it, is a provincial park as well. So yeah, I think I wanted to talk a little bit about our Smoky Mountain. And I'd spent quite a bit of time down in North Carolina after meeting this band. I went back down and toured with Sam Taylor and played 5 shows with him around North Carolina last year. And we would go to Asheville to the Great Smoky Mountains. And I really appreciate that area. It really feels a lot like the Maritimes. You know, they're
Cool.
playing fiddles, and banjos, and they love traditional music and good barbecue there. And it's a real country culture. It just I definitely felt that North Carolina had a lot in common, specifically with Nova Scotia. And so kept going back there. I actually just played a festival there last week called Reefstock. It was an incredible place, a little almost natural amphitheater in the forest is what it felt like.
Cool.
I think I'll keep going back down there quite a bit. And I think the title Smoky Mountain High was definitely a tribute to my John Denver influences, but also because I think I'm playing country music in a way, but it's not classic country music. But I grew up in the country, and I
Hmm.
definitely play music that leans towards my Celtic and country influences growing up here. And so, yeah, I can say that it's a tribute probably both to Rocky Mountain High, a bit to my time down in the Great Smoky Mountains, and then definitely also to Smoky Mountain here and to the time I spent in the Highlands here during during the pandemic and wrote most of this album here in our Smoky Mountain.
And now another kind of throwback to all these connections to your hometown and your home base. You have a couple shows coming up in the next couple days as a little advance album release party before the full album's released.
Yeah, I think it was a good way to give people a chance to hear the songs and even buy the record before it comes out on streaming platforms because excuse me, kind of have an old school approach with that. And I don't actually have all of my albums on streaming platforms. My first record, Traveling Man, is only on Bandcamp. You can buy it as a digital download, or I sell CDs at my shows.
Cool.
I don't believe in giving Spotify everything. Okay. They're not giving
Hmm.
much to us. I'm happy to have my music up on there, but they can't have all of it. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I like the idea of selling my physical record, my vinyls and CDs before it actually comes out on streaming platforms. Then you can hear the whole record. I mean, I've released 3 singles since August, but there's 10 songs on the record. And if you want to hear the other 7, come out to one of these 3 shows. And I'm actually selling these guys right here. This is the
Oh,
vinyl. They
amazing.
just came in a couple days ago.
Hmm.
I'm super excited about them. They're made by a company called Standard Vinyl in Victoria, BC. And I will have copies of these at my shows this week. Actually, let me show you the color. The color is really beautiful.
Amazing. That was going to be
Yeah,
my follow-up question.
yeah. It's almost like it's like a burnt sienna, or it looks like salted caramel or something when you look at it through the light. Like you could eat these things. Like I was so happy when I opened these up and I felt like this was the best thing I've ever made. So I'm really excited to have these on hand. We just listened to one at my dad's friend's place up the road in his garage. He's got a great, hi-fi record system. And we sat down and listened to it beginning to end to really,
Amazing.
for the first time, put our feet up and relax and cheers and pour a drink and celebrate. And so, yeah, it sounded great to me and I can't wait to sell these. I have CDs as well on hand in case there's any old
Perfect.
school CD collectors. A lot of people still have CD players in their cars. So yeah, I'll have those too. And yeah, I want to be able to play the songs and let people leave and go home with the songs. And then of course, November 1st, it'll come out. And if there's, streaming people, that's cool too. But first and foremost, physical copies to a lot of independent artists is still, a big part of the way we make a living. So
I
yeah, I'm
love
going
to
to
see
give
it.
people a chance to hear it if they want to buy the album, they can hear it early.
Amazing. And now for future tour dates, I imagine there will be a lot more announcements to come. If a new album's coming out, you're going to definitely want to be pushing that a little bit. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of festivals and stuff that are aware of who you are. You've been performing all over the place anyway. But is there anything that you know of right now that you can tell viewers if they want to start marking some dates on their calendars?
Well, I haven't completely set it in stone yet, but I was just talking to my agent and another event organizer in Montreal. Montreal's been my home base over the past 10 years and where I played all my first shows and still my primary fan base. And Montreal is one of the places that I had to have a release show. I mean, I have 3 here in Cape Breton. I'm playing at the Fortress of Louisbourg tonight.
Hmm.
I play tomorrow in IONA at the Frolic and Folk with a full band. I love the Frolic and Folk. I've been there many times. It's always a great crowd. And then Saturday night I play at the Carleton in Halifax. And so yeah, I guess the Montreal date is probably going to be in December. We can't announce the exact date yet. It's still going to be confirmed, but that's going to be the next show. So if you're in the Montreal area, or if you're in Ottawa or somewhere nearby Montreal and you want to come to a show, we'll be announcing that date really soon.
Perfect. So along those lines too, then where should I send people to follow you online so they can keep up to date?
They can find me anywhere from Instagram to TikTok, at Mike McKenna Jr. I have a website, mikemckenna.jr.com, that'll have all of my socials. I still have music on SoundCloud. You'll find my music on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you listen to it. You'll find my music there. So yeah, pretty easy to find, I think.
Perfect. I've been guilty of kind of abandoning my TikTok account probably about a year ago, but I noticed the other day when I was watching somebody else's video that I have quite a few new followers. So I'll
It
I'll
keeps
have to
moving,
follow you, and I'll start generating some new content over there in the near future.
Man, it's a tight-knit community, TikTok, I found. And so, yeah, absolutely. Shoot me a follow. I'll follow you too. And I really actually enjoy TikTok. I think, sometimes it gets a bit of a bad rap, but there's something about these condensed 15-second videos that can be incredibly useful if you start pursuing things that you're just genuinely interested in, want to
Yeah.
learn about, instead of just doom scrolling all the time. If you're really a musician, or if you're any kind of maker or something, and you kind of go down that rabbit hole, it'll start showing you more and more so than Instagram, I find.
Yeah.
My Instagram feed feels weird, like they're trying to push some stuff on me, and I find
Yeah.
TikTok is a little bit more like, oh, this is what I want to see, and I like that about
Yeah.
TikTok.
Yeah. The algorithm's a little quicker to pick up what your vibe is for
Yes,
the day.
you can let it. I jump in and out. You can let it sit for a while, and it'll roll.
Yeah. Yeah. So also I wanted to ask, as far as new listeners, people that are new to Mike as of today, is there a song that you would like to play off this episode with?
Sure. Yeah, I think from my new record, I think "Long Sable Isle" would probably be the
Okay.
song that I would like to go out with. That's the one I'm most excited to play in these upcoming shows. It's a song I wrote about Sable Island.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Back in 2019, I was discussing with another musician friend of mine, performing on a boat that would go around New England and through the Maritimes, and it was going to stop at Sable Island. And I was
Mm-hmm.
really excited about it. And in 2020, that would get canceled.
Oh.
So during this time, I wrote a song about Sable Island. It's a really beautiful and mysterious place, and it's a national park actually now, and known for their wild horses.
Mm-hmm.
For anybody that's not familiar with Sable Island, the Spanish left horses there 500 years ago, and they've managed to survive. And it's this really windswept, beautiful island that's just rugged, and there's been, plenty of shipwrecks there, to the point where it's called the graveyard of the Atlantic. And it's really not far from here. It's if you were to look at a map, like go onto Google Earth or something, and look at this part of Cape Breton, especially where I'm at here in Mira in southeastern Cape Breton, it's basically just, southeast of here. It's not super far maybe from where the Titanic shipwrecked, or from Halifax either. It's kind of in the same area. It's kind of south of here. So yeah, hopefully I get to Sable Island someday. I'd love to get out there at some point, and maybe shoot a video out there, or just
I
to be
was
there would be beautiful. But
I was gonna say I haven't been myself. I also would like to get there. I mean, it's way too close to have never been there. It's almost a sin that we haven't been. But
yeah,
I like to help behind the scenes on music videos too. So maybe we'll find an
let's chat,
opportunity.
man.
Yeah,
Let's chat.
definitely.
My dad said to me, if you end up going to Sable Island, he's like, make sure I'm on the list to come.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And excuse me. And I said that to him. I was like, well, these are little planes, I don't know how many seats are going to be up there. I was only teasing him because, of course, I'd love to bring him with me, because
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think Sable Island is kind of a once in a lifetime type place. So, yeah, I definitely got to find a way to bring my dad out there too.
Perfect.
And yeah, I'd love to go out there with a nice group and do something cool out there. I feel like, they don't allow maybe a ton of people out there because of the
Yeah,
footprint of tourism and the potential of
absolutely.
that, so it's a highly protected place, and I think you have to, excuse me, tread quite carefully when you're out there to not upset
For sure.
the probably very fragile ecosystem that's, those horses survived there for such a long time, and you don't want to
Absolutely.
change that. It's so beautiful.
Absolutely. Well, let's see where that brings us, and we'll play off right now for people to get a treat, and hopefully they catch you at a show and pick up some vinyl.
Awesome. Thanks so
Okay.
much for having me.
Thanks again, Mike.
Take care, man.
On a long Sable Isle, not so far away, where the dunes meet the sky and short are the days. There's sweet grass and sea glass and salt on the wind. And if you find yourself stranded here, you better start digging. Where were these ships wreck? I am and I, all alongside the horses of the long Sable Isle. moss blooms and the wild ponies roam. I lay down my true love when the sand meets the sea, and at the pearly white gates she'll be waiting for me. She'll be waiting for me. So far away, where the dunes meet the sky and short are the days. There's sandward and beach peat and freshwater ponds, and the gale-beaten trees dot the endless horizon. Where were these ships wrecked? Iron men died, oh, alongside the horses of the long Sable Isle. Long Sable